Okay, hello everyone and welcome to EPA's Decentralized Wastewater Webcast Series. Today's session is titled Innovative Septic Improvement Program in Suffolk County, New York. My name is Zach Lowenstein and I work at EPA's headquarters in Washington, D.C. in the Decentralized Wastewater Program as part of the Office of Wastewater Management. This program manages the decentralized MOU partnership and our annual outreach program, Septic Smart Week, which many of you may be familiar with. The MOU partnership joins the EPA and 18 other partner organizations together to work collaboratively at the national level to improve decentralized performance and protect the nation's public health and water resources. So as part of the MOU partnership, we're pleased to sponsor this webinar. Before we begin, I just want to start by saying we appreciate you taking the time to view this webinar, especially on a day like today where there's a lot of snow, a lot of office closures along the mid to northern East Atlantic. So we definitely appreciate you taking the time for that. I also want to cover a few important housekeeping items. You should have the Adobe Connect session running with a cover slide for the webcast series showing on your screen currently. If you have called into this webinar, please mute your phones to limit any feedback. If you are having any technical difficulties, please type in the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and someone from our team will assist you. Speaking of the chat box, you can use this to ask questions at any time during the webinar. We will note your questions and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website, www.epa.gov/septic, shortly after it airs. With that, we're ready to get started. I'd like to introduce Christina Heineman, who's the Decentralized Coordinator from Region 2 in New York, to give you a brief introduction of today's topic and our two presenters, Peter Scully and Walter Dawidiak from Suffolk County. Christina has been actively involved with the MOU partnership and is excited to introduce the speakers from her home region. Thank you again for attending, and with that, I will turn it over to Christina.
Thank you, Zach, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce this webinar and our two speakers today. And I have to say, looking back on the timeline and milestones that have been part of Suffolk County's Reclaim Our Water initiative dating to the spring of 2013 and the county executive's declaration of nitrogen as public enemy number 1 in January of 2014, the journey has been both remarkable and impressive. The county has steadily and deliberately moved the ball forward, but with necessary caution and thoroughness, and I have to say also with imagination and creativity and some humor, since they sponsored the first ever countywide Crapshoot Film Festival, because you can't gamble with our water quality, an event that culminated during Septic Smart Week in 2014. Both Peter Scully and Walter Dawidiak are true public servants in the very best sense of the words. They are both extremely busy. Local governments live and breathe by the adage that the buck stops here. Despite this, Peter and Walter have always been very generous with their time. The webinar today is an example of that. Both of their bios appear on the webinar flyer, but both Peter and Walter have had long and distinguished careers in environmental and water quality protection. Prior to being named Deputy County Executive and the county's Water Quality Czar, for 12 years, Peter Scully headed the Long Island Regional Office for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Walter is the Director of the Division of Environmental Quality at the Suffolk County Department of Health Services, where he leads the county's efforts to protect drinking water and the surface waters that surround the county to the north, east, and south. Walter is both an attorney and a professional engineer, a powerful combination of expertise. And I think with that, I turn it over to Peter to get things started.
Good afternoon, folks. It's a pleasure for Walter and I to be with you. We appreciate people taking the time. I guess I should figure out who's controlling the slideshow. Would that be me? I guess it is. So as Christina indicated, Walter and I have been working on Suffolk County Executive Ballone's Reclaim Our Water initiative together since I arrived here in May of 2015. I arrived here from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, where I had also been steeped in these issues, and the county executive, when he took office, decided he would step up and begin to address what had historically been a very difficult issue for elected officials to confront. It's a multifaceted program. We're going to talk about different aspects of it today. We'll describe briefly the nitrogen problem as we know it. We have a very exciting project called the Subwatersheds Wastewater Plant underway that Walt will brief you on. Part of our effort is aimed at regulatory aspects of our governmental authority and making some policy changes there. One of the innovative things that we've done in Suffolk County was to try and put to the test many of the technologies that are being considered throughout the nation as alternatives to conventional cesspools and septic systems. I think you'll find interesting how we lured the manufacturers into a program that provides us with an opportunity to test these technologies in the field to make sure that they work in real-world conditions here in Suffolk County. Having done that, we moved at the county executive's direction into an area of trying to make it affordable for homeowners who want to voluntarily change out the old technology for new technology through our Septic Improvement Incentive Program, which is an exciting development here. And finally, we're working with governmental partners on all levels and academics on a harmful algal bloom action plan that was recently issued by Suffolk County. So we have a lot of things to talk to you about today, and we'll have plenty of time afterwards for Q&A. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Suffolk County, we're on Long Island, which is kind of a little sandbar that sticks out into the Atlantic off of New York City. It was torn away from the northeast coast by the glaciers, and it's a very special place. Because it's on a sandbar and surrounded by water, it relies on its natural resources for economic reasons, recreational reasons, which are important to the economy, and of course for our drinking water. It's served by one of the few federally designated sole source aquifers, which is very vulnerable, and we have estuary systems in Suffolk County, two of which are federally designated and one by the state, all of which are impaired by nitrogen. And much of our problem is attributed to the fact that very little of our county is served by active wastewater treatment, which is what really gave rise to the Reclaim Our Waters initiative. So it's not a new issue. These are two newspaper articles that date back to 1968 and 1969, when Suffolk County was in the midst of a development boom. Levittown is considered the very first subdivision in the nation in the neighboring county to our west. It began to welcome returning veterans after World War II, and development began to creep further east into Suffolk County throughout the 50s and 1960s. And by the late 1960s, it was well realized that the lack of active wastewater treatment was a long-term threat both to the environment and to the economy. And as these articles indicate, Suffolk County was being pushed by both the state and federal governments to move towards sewering of the entire county. And in fact, elected officials at that time began taking steps to move in that direction. Those steps became very complicated for a variety of reasons. One reason was that they decided that rather than just put in place the sewer systems, given the potential cost impacts to homeowners, the elected officials decided it would be necessary to put any proposal for the creation of a sewer district and the installation of a sewer system up to a vote for the county and the affected areas in particular. And their very first effort to do that didn't turn out so well. It continues to be a problem to this day, but this very first effort to put in place a regional sewer system went down at the polls 6-1 in a vote that occurred in February of 1969. The county subsequently reformulated a smaller sewer district proposal and put it before the voters on Election Day the following year. It was narrowly approved by a vote of 25,000 to 22,000, but in the implementation phase, the project fell into all sorts of problems, both significant cost overruns, unfortunate political corruption, some prosecutions, even including a murder of the Environmental Control Commissioner the day before he was to testify. And the combination of these factors and the political outfall really slowed sewer development in Suffolk County. There was some limited sewer development over the ensuing 30 or 40 years, but really no focus on a larger approach to dealing with wastewater treatment across Suffolk County, which is a very large area. A lot of that changed when County Executive Malone took office. He decided that he was going to step up and begin to address the problem, and in March of 2015, Suffolk County issued an updated comprehensive water resources management plan. This is a cover page of that document. We're very proud of it. It deals with a wide variety of issues. It was completed under the leadership of Walt and his staff in the Health Department, with financial support from the Suffolk County Water Authority and important input from our Department of Economic Development and Planning. It deals with a wide variety of potential threats to water quality. The one we're going to talk about today, and which has been the focus of our Reclaim Our Waters initiative over the past couple of years, is the issues associated with nitrogen. So this is the graph that the staff prepared that allows people to understand the significance of the findings of the update of the Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan. It was the increases in the concentrations of nitrate in the aquifers that underlie Suffolk County that set off alarm bells when the plan was released in 2015. You can see some of those percentage increases. It was kind of a call to action for people in government agencies on all levels and the NGO community, and the county executive, to the relief, I think, of a lot of people, decided he would make it a very top priority of his new administration. So there are significant impacts to our environmental resources and our economy as a result of some of the impairments that result from nitrogen pollution. Suffolk County once supplied the large majority of all the hard clams that were served or eaten across the country, and you can see based on the bar graph on the lower left-hand side just how much the clamming industry, the shellfishing industry, has been impacted over the past 30 or 40 years. It's a fraction of what it once was. On the right-hand side, you'll see the scallop industry, which there's been a lot of work on the East End to try and restore, and we're seeing some indications that there's rebounding, but there's nothing consistent there. We're also infamous, I'd say, as being the home of the largest number and most diversity, I think, of harmful algal blooms. That map in the top left depicts some of the impacts that have been documented over the past several years, and we are suffering major loss of wetlands throughout the region. And we'll get into all of these issues in a little bit more detail, I think, later in the presentation. So this is a slide that we use to try and catch people's attention when we're out in public talking about our programs. It tries to get them to understand what the visible impacts associated with septic and cesspool systems and resultant nitrogen pollution are, and what the contributing factors are towards nitrogen pollution. And you can see based on the pie chart in the middle that septic and cesspool systems are considered to be the major contributor. This is one study, I think, of the Great South Bay, the large bay on the south shore of Long Island between the mainland and the Barrier Beach, which separates the island from the Atlantic Ocean. But other studies show pretty much the same thing, that about 70% of the nitrogen that we find in surface waters actually gets into the surface water through a variety of means, and primarily through groundwater. It's carried from cesspools and septic systems into surface waters. And we have seen some impacts over the past several years that people seem to understand. We see fish kills. There's a photograph of one of those on this slide. Fish kills are sometimes a result of natural conditions, but that fish kill, which occurred in the summer of 2015, was studied by our Suffolk County Department of Health Services and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, which concluded that it was a result, at least in part, of increased nitrogen pollution in the Peconic Bay, Great Peconic Bay or Peconic Estuary. We see increasing number of beach closures in a community that really relies on its tourism economy and where people have made decisions to live in Suffolk County based on the proximity to the beach. Beach closures are things that people notice, and on the bottom right-hand side of the slide you can see what an algal bloom looks like. Aerial photographs of algal blooms are very popular these days, but they really make people understand what the potential impacts of daily activities are on the environment. So here's a map that staff prepared to try and give context to people who we talk to about the need for active treatment. The numbers are astounding. We have over 360,000 individual on-site disposal systems on residential properties alone. 209,000 of those are in areas in close proximity to surface water with quick travel times to groundwater. And approximately 250,000 of those systems predate a 1973 requirement that a homeowner or a developer install a septic tank in front of a leaching ring in order to provide some pre-treatment of wastewater. So we have 250,000 systems in the ground in residences alone that don't even have the benefit of a septic tank. The numbers are daunting, and sometimes people will question whether or not we could ever really make a difference. The county executive has made clear that what we are going to do is to establish priorities in terms of areas where the use of new technologies will make the most difference and be most cost effective. Walt's going to talk a little bit about that on the sub-watersheds plan, and the county executive has directed that we should make progress each and every year toward that goal, not be daunted by the large numbers. So we use this slide. Some of the staff like it, and some of the staff do not, just because we have kind of a broader approach to wastewater. There are areas in which sewering makes sense in Suffolk County. They're relatively few and far between. Many times it makes sense in areas where we have a nearby treatment facility that has available capacity, and where connecting a community where sewering would make a big difference is a cost-effective option. Or if we have a pre-existing downtown business district where the use of cesspools and septic systems is constraining growth or future development and impacting the environment, we see some interest in providing active sewage treatment there. But for many areas of Suffolk County, which is a very diverse county, a fully developed suburb on its western boundary, and increasingly more rural as you move east towards the Twin Forks of Long Island, which are still very rural. In areas where development patterns are less dense, sewering is just not a cost-effective option. We find that in some cases the cost to sewer an individual parcel could exceed $100,000, and there's tremendous concern on the part of some of the governments and the NGOs on Long Island that the introduction of sewering to some of the rural areas will actually induce development that would be inconsistent with their land use plans and goals. And in communities like that, the solution, rather than sewering parcels that are now relying on cesspools and septics, is to move instead towards the use of these new innovative alternative treatment technologies, which we'll talk about more in the presentation. And then the middle leg is this idea of a neighborhood cluster system, kind of a moderately sized treatment system that is capable of managing and treating waste from a small subdivision, modular home park, or a situation like that. We've been looking for an opportunity to land one of those. We thought we had a good location on the North Fork of Long Island, which didn't pan out. We're working with the town on the South Fork right now on one potential location. And we've always considered that modular home parks are a potentially good candidate for the location of a cluster system. We did obtain a $1 million grant from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to install such a system on a pilot basis. We have not as of yet been successful in landing one, but we are interested in all three of these options to advance active wastewater treatment in Suffolk County. So this slide talks a little bit about some of the sewer projects that we are working on with local governments. We, in the wake of Sandy, while I was still at DEC, decided to attempt to obtain grant funding in the post-Sandy resiliency process to connect parcels to sewer along the south shore of Long Island. We made an argument that nitrogen in surface water was degrading wetlands, and that wetlands were an initial line of protection against storm surge, and that for that reason it would be appropriate for the state of New York and federal funding agencies to provide post-Sandy resiliency funding to allow us to connect parcels to sewer, and you see that little box in the middle of the page. We have essentially been awarded $383 million in aid to connect parcels along 4 river corridors along Suffolk County's south shore, which are on the map on the bottom of the page, to sewer, and that effort is underway. So we are advancing some sewer proposals across Suffolk County. And then the map on the right-hand side shows other areas in which there's tremendous interest on the part of the citizenry and elected officials to advancing sewer, and efforts are underway to evaluate that as a possible solution to the wastewater crisis that we're facing. But IA systems are the real focus of the work that we'll be talking about today. And what I found when I arrived at Suffolk County is that it's not such a simple matter. The county executive, quickly realized that in order to put these facilities and these types of systems into the ground, there would need to be a series of steps taken to make sure that the county was successful and that the process would be supported and embraced by citizens. The very first, on the far left of this slide, is the idea of a pilot program to show that these technologies actually treat wastewater as effectively as advertised. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but the short story is that the county went out to the industry, to all manufacturers of these systems that they could identify, and basically said any manufacturer can participate in a program. We're Suffolk County. We have 360,000 residential systems in the ground that could ultimately need to be replaced. We're a major potential market for your product. Would you be willing to invest in the future of Suffolk County by donating systems to show that they function the way that you advertise them? 4 manufacturers responded positively to a first round of that program and donated 6 different technologies. The county held a lottery of interested homeowners and put 19 systems in the ground to test those, hoping that after getting 6 months of steady operating data showing they performed down to regulatory standard 19 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen or less, we would certify those provisionally for use in Suffolk County. As public awareness and support began to mount, the county went out on a second round of the pilot program, and another 8 technologies are now in the ground and performing under our pilot program from the second round, including some technologies that hail from other countries like Japan, Fuji being one of those. So the pilot program is an important part of an overall plan. But then the county executive pointed out that these systems are different than cesspools and septic systems, where a homeowner really only needs to see a company to support them if there's a problem with the system. These systems are miniature treatment systems. The county executive pointed out that we don't have an industry in Suffolk County that's prepared to support them. We don't have people who are certified and trained to install them. We don't have people who are certified or trained to maintain them, and we need to work to grow an industry if we're going to be successful in using these systems in the broader sense across Suffolk County. And so several years ago, the county team approached the wastewater industry, which at that time amounted to companies which pump out septic systems, which build cesspools and septic systems, and which transport wastewater that they pump, and explained to the industry that change was coming to Suffolk County, and asked the industry to work with the county to make sure that the change was orderly, to work with the county on drafting a law requiring that people be trained and that was a successful effort. In 2015, our Suffolk County Legislature enacted a licensing law, which took effect the following year, and the county began immediately to facilitate training for people who were interested in learning more about these systems. State regulations require that in order for the county to authorize the use of these systems in its borders, the county needs to designate a responsible management entity to regulate installations and maintenance, and our Suffolk County Department of Health Services was designated as that responsible management entity by virtue of the enactment of Article 19 of our Sanitary Code, which is the middle line in this slide. And then, as I indicated earlier, a part of what we're doing is updating sanitary code provisions that really haven't been addressed since the 1970s. And so we've been working closely with a working group that's comprised of government officials on all levels, including local governments, which regulate land use, which is important for us, elected officials, the building industry, represented by the Long Island Builders Institute, and a lot of the NGOs, including the Nature Conservancy, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, the Pine Barrens Society, and others. And we're continuing to push out proposals for modifications of regulations. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then finally, we're putting the new technologies in place. Walt's going to talk about the Sub-Watersheds Plan, which is helping to identify priority areas for advanced treatment. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Septic Incentive Program, which is our first step towards providing funding to make it affordable for folks to install these technologies. So our program is called the Suffolk Cesspool Upgrade Program Enterprise, or SCOOP. And we've been extremely fortunate to get significant financial support from the state of New York. Each and every year, we have been able to rely on them for funding that allows us to employ staff who are administering the programs and to support various aspects of our regulatory efforts as well. State DEC has been very nimble. Every once in a while, we'll have an interaction with elected officials that causes us to need to pivot quickly and propose to fund something different than what has originally been proposed. And they have been with us every step of the way. We're very fortunate. So this slide just lists some of the things that we have going on, some of which I have mentioned. I'll try and move through these a little bit more quickly. And now I'd like to turn it over to Walter to talk a little bit about the Sub-Watersheds Wastewater Plan. Walt?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Zach and Christina and EPA and everybody for participating. It's an honor to present. I sit in the Division of Environmental Quality in the Health Department. We've had a long involvement in wastewater under a couple of state codes. One of them is a state sanitary code under state health department jurisdiction. That basically deals with small flows of under 1,000 gallons per day, which is most of what you're going to be hearing about today. We also have delegated authority from our State Department of Environmental Conservation to implement the State Pollution Discharge Elimination System Program under EPA's Clean Water Act and the State Environmental Conservation Law. So we regulate the 198 sewage treatment plants that currently exist in Suffolk County. We have more sewage treatment plants than any other county by far in New York State. It's a complicated county. A lot of the functions that we assumed are basically state-level functions, even though we coordinate closely with consistency. State agencies have been great partners and great leaders. We've also got investigation capabilities going back to the 1970s in terms of well drilling. We have an extensive monitoring well network of several hundred wells. We also have a fleet of boats and a marine monitoring capability for our streams and bays. So putting that all together, we've also conducted a series of plans over the years, going back to supporting the two-way plan in the 1970s. Our latest initiative is the Sub-Watersheds Wastewater Plan, which was directed by the county executive to come up with a real blueprint and a roadmap, essentially for each and every parcel, which has been mapped and assessed in terms of nitrogen loading potential as well as impact. And we're going to have recommendations on management options. And the goal, again, is to support this notion of a coherent countywide approach and hopefully a county district. So this is to use the best possible science to support the policy decisions. It's based on various models, data evaluations, and ultimately a cost-benefit analysis. It's the first time something this ambitious has been done since the 1970s, to our knowledge, in Suffolk County. We've scribed 191 separate subwatersheds and looked at the land uses, point sources, nitrogen loads in those areas. And this is the first time this has ever been done with an integrated and predictive groundwater model unifying these three estuary areas together. The idea is to look at different trigger points, existing development, full build-out, and no action in terms of what it's going to do to our groundwater, drinking water, harbors, and bays, and look at different management options, including requiring sanitary system upgrades either on property transfer or system failure or new construction or by date certain in a given sensitive area. We're coupling this with a generic environmental impact statement, so we'll be ready to hit the ground running, hopefully with respect to our State Environmental Quality Review Act for implementation. And the goal is to have this all in place, a draft plan by this summer, and a final plan coupled with SECRA being done by the end of this year. So this is going to support the long game in terms of all these sanitary upgrades. This slide illustrates that the Reclaim Our Water initiative and subwatersheds wastewater plan is really one element of the Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan. The state has spearheaded a more holistic and integrated view of nitrogen reduction. It's basically a 5-year initiative. It's looking at issues like stormwater, fertilizer, controls such as permeable reactive barriers, which are basically carbon walls to intercept groundwater and remove nitrogen. We're looking at strategically testing those in very high influx, high nitrogen embayments. Also looking at aquaculture. We'll be talking about kelp briefly later. Folks are also talking about testing oyster reefs and other in-water uptake mechanisms. So there is a bigger picture involved. Our subwatersheds wastewater plan is going to make some assumptions about those load reductions, but as Peter mentioned, the order of magnitude of septic nitrogen loading is 70% in the South Shore, comparable on the North Shore and on the East End. This is the elephant in the room. This is the one we need to come to terms with, and this is the primary focus of this particular plan. In terms of wastewater flows in the county, we're dealing with about 190 million gallons per day, upwards of 200 million gallons per day. Peter talked about the nature of the county. We have over 1 million people living on the West End. The growth potential there is only on the order of 5 to 10%. On the East End, where we have significantly less than 500,000 people, we're talking about a bigger growth potential in some of our more sensitive embayments. Some of the numbers are on the order of 40%. So this flow number can and will go up, particularly in central and eastern Suffolk County. The point of the graphic is to illustrate in the red that the great majority of loading is from individual on-site systems and particularly individual residences. There is a significant commercial flow dimension. It's on the order of 10 to 20% of the wastewater, but we're largely a residential community and a residential wastewater generator, and that's the biggest part of the problem that we need to come to terms with. This graphic illustrates how we've been looking at nitrogen impacts on groundwater for the last several decades. We thought we were doing really well. That slide that Peter showed nitrogen in the range of 2 to 4 milligrams per liter, about 2 in our deeper Magathie aquifer, about 4 milligrams per liter in our shallowest upper glacial aquifer. The drinking water standard is 10, so we're not even approaching half of the drinking water standard. And our entire environmental management model was really set up back in the 70s to attain the drinking water number of 10 milligram per liter nitrates, or effectively total nitrogen. The surface water guideline by a number of studies has been shown to be needed to be about 0.4 to 0.5 milligram per liter total nitrogen. Now with flushing and attenuation and uptake, that doesn't mean your groundwater needs to be 0.4 to 0.5, but it definitely needs to be somewhere closer to 2 than it is 4 milligrams per liter. So these unsewered land uses in the middle, which are approaching 6 milligrams per liter, all the development has been effective in keeping groundwater by and large below the drinking water standard. It has not worked in terms of what's needed in terms of surface waters, and the TMDL model and point source regulation has just not been effective. TMDLs of about 50% for the sound study were mainly met with point source upgrades. In areas like the Peconics, we were talking about 25 to 50% reductions. mainly from non-point sources, mainly from septics. Those just haven't happened, and they need to. This shows what we're dealing with in terms of septic loadings on a concentration basis. Septic tank influent, we rated about 65 milligrams per liter. Innovative and alternative effluent, this 19 milligram per liter number is based on New England standards. It's about a 70% reduction, actually higher because we're seeing higher influent numbers given low flow plumbing fixtures over here. With the pressurized shallow drain field, we hope to cut that in half, which means that in receiving groundwater, we'll be looking at about a 2 to 2.5 part per million nitrogen level, which is pretty consistent with some of the goals in prior studies in the literature to significantly change the trajectory of the loading and the impacts to our surface waters. Here are some good-looking maps, which are also very useful. The one on the lower left shows travel time to embayments as a function of land and travel time. We have 191 embayments delineated for our three major estuary systems as well as our freshwaters. Zooming into West Neck Bay, which has historically been an incubator for the brown tide, we're looking at groundwater coming in mostly in the 0 to 2 and 2 to 10 year travel time, which is the red and the orange. The model has the capability, and it's used to overlay each and every parcel and assign nitrogen loadings to it in existing and future scenarios. It also partitions volumetric flow rates of groundwater inflow and nitrogen loading. So right now our assumption of 25-year travel time is being the most sensitive, with an aggregation of a number of these subwatersheds where we found that most of the groundwater and nitrogen to our sensitive bays came in within a 25-year travel time. It was about an 80-90% value. That may be refined as a result of this study as our consultant moves forward with individual and aggregated embayments. This particular map shows you a future scenario of nitrogen concentrations after 200 years, and this is a nice heat map type approach where you see central Suffolk and some of the more dense unsewered areas having very significant yellow, orange, and red nitrogen loadings. That cross-hatched area in southwestern Suffolk is the Southwest Sewer District. A lot of nitrogen removed there, but if you look just to the north and the east, you still have a lot of hotspots that are bleeding in to Great South Bay, and the trend of land use has been such that more and more of that nitrogen is coming in. Suffolk County developed largely between the 50s and 70s with exponential land use and residential unsewered development. We thought that by now that some of the nitrogen concentrations would be leveling and flatlining, giving that 50-year travel time. There's still enough residual legacy and new nitrogen coming into the system that hasn't happened. Nitrogen rates are continuing to go up, which, as Peter mentioned, is a huge concern. I wanted to mention a word. Peter mentioned DEC's leadership and support with respect to grant funding and the Nitrogen Action Plan. EPA has been a huge leader with management models and case studies. They've led the Sound Study as well as the Peconic Estuary Program and funded various demonstration programs and wastewater management programs throughout the Mid-Atlantic and New England. The Chesapeake Bay Data Sharing Agreement was an important seminal model. We've recently established the New England Long Island Data Sharing Agreement, which is going to give us better access to data and swifter approvals of technologies, which has been one of the rate determiners in getting this program to progress. The Nitrogen Sensor Challenge is another important initiative led by Christina Heinemann and Maggie Thoreau and others at EPA. They've recently identified several winners in their phase 1, which are being tested in Massachusetts and are going to be purchased and used in Suffolk County. To reduce cost to the industry, it could save $50,000 or more that a company would otherwise have to invest in getting a technology from provisional to general use approval. It's going to improve the quality of data, streamline reporting, and provide real-time information necessary to enhance performance. So we're very excited about this project and look forward to it moving forward. 1972 was when Richard Nixon was president and about when EPA was established, and this is the last greatest residential breakthrough before recent years from Suffolk County. We added a septic tank to our leaching pool. Here in Suffolk County, we've historically used vertical leaching, not horizontal, as is common in much of the rest of the country. This is due to our sandy soils, where as long as you maintain some separation to groundwater, your ammonia is converting to nitrate. You're getting rid of your wastewater essentially via an injection well, and with very small lots, there were very few alternatives. So this was the preferred method. Just a leaching pool is basically a cesspool. They were historically blocked. They were a safety hazard. They cave in. They do very little to treat wastewater other than converting ammonia to nitrate when they're not sitting in groundwater. Adding a septic tank was basically primary settling and treatment and retention of solids. Between 1972 and 2016, this was really the only option for residences without sewers available to them. Peter, did you want to pick up the sanitary code changes?
All right, Walt, thanks for that. Thanks for handing it off. So, yeah, I had mentioned earlier that one of the things we needed really to do to lay the groundwork for an evolution away from the use of cesspools and septics to these new technologies was to designate our Department of Health Services as a responsible management entity, and the addition of Article 19 to the Suffolk County Sanitary Code in August of 2016 accomplished that, and also, establish a performance standard for IA systems of 19 milligrams per liter. That was an important step, but we have a lot of other steps to take because as things stand, the sanitary code still allows the installation of traditional conventional septic systems for single-family development. But Article 19 was an important step. As I indicated, it did a number of things for us, as indicated in this slide. Authorizes our department importantly, to promulgate procedures, protocols, and standards, which they've been doing ever since Article 19 was enacted, and empowers the department to oversee installation and maintenance, and we have a lot of things underway trying to give life to that responsibility. We'll talk a little bit about our longer-term plans for a kind of a computerized system for reporting. It's very exciting. It's a very big deal. Article 19 was an important step in terms of trying to lay that foundation. But we have a lot of other things to consider, and what we've found over the past year or so is that as aware as many of us are of the urgency to move away from the use of these non-performing systems in favor of systems that will actually actively treat wastewater, some of the policymakers are not as aware. That's going to present that's going to present something of a challenge for us as we move forward. We did have great and robust interaction at our working group with trying to forecast policy changes in the years ahead. We thought a natural first step would be to require the use of IA technologies in new construction because the cost of the system obviously would be a cost of a project, and we'll only be talking about the difference in the cost of an IA system compared to a conventional septic system. But during the course of the discussions of that policy option, the Long Island Builders Institute came back to the working group and essentially said we could understand why you would want to require the use of these systems in new construction, but can we ask why, if you're going to require the use of these systems in new construction, would you continue to allow people who simply have cesspools in the ground to replace them with new cesspools? The number of replacements that take place each year in Suffolk County is greater than the number of new systems. So that from a policy standpoint, that resonated for many of us, but the staff quickly pointed out that if we ever wanted to move in a direction of requiring homeowners to replace outdated technology with new technology when they were replacing a system, assuming we had financial resources to make it affordable, the county would first need to regulate replacement of systems. And we found that the sanitary code as it existed in Suffolk County had two glaring problems. Number one, even though the sanitary code was modified in the early 1970s to require the installation of a septic tank upon new installation, it did not address the need for a septic tank upon system replacement, nor was anybody required to even have a permit to replace their system. So there's a whole universe of activity out there that we don't regulate. And in order to move in a direction where we could possibly require people to use new technology upon system replacement, we would first need to require permits for system replacement. So in late 2017, the working group required or recommended to both the Board of Health Services and our Suffolk County Legislature an update or a modification of the sanitary code to move us in that direction by requiring that the industry to begin report to us in July of this year on the activities that they have underway, pump out activity, system replacements, and then a year after that, in July 2019, homeowners who are having systems replaced would be required to get a permit from the county in order to replace the system, and would be required as part of that permitting process to install a system that complies with the existing sanitary code, which as of this date would require that a septic tank be installed. But these were easily understood and incremental first steps. They were strongly supported both by the environmental community and even the Long Island Builders Institute. We found that when we got before the Suffolk County Legislature, which had the final say on the proposal, that they were tremendously concerned about the potential cost impacts to their constituents of being forced to include a septic tank upon system replacement, and we had quite a tussle getting the legislature to act in a split vote to advance that amendment to the sanitary code. We were successful, but it wasn't easy. So as we enter 2018, we're moving now to, I think, what will be the more substantive and more important changes to the county's regulatory process as relates to installing or requiring the use of IA systems in new construction, perhaps requiring the use of IA systems upon system failure, or possibly requiring the use of IA technology or the installation of a new system upon property transfer, as they do in Rhode Island. And finally, talking about amending the density limit in unsewered areas to limit development to 1 unit per acre. So these are discussions we're having preliminarily right now. They will be supported by our sub-watersheds plan, which is going to be released in a couple of months, in which we will include some policy recommendations, and supported by the generic environmental impact statement that is being completed on the sub-watersheds plan. So here are some statistics that the staff generated explaining the implications of some of the potential policy changes that we're considering. There were years in the 60s and 70s when literally thousands of residential units a year were being built. Development has slowed somewhat, but the numbers are still somewhat large. You can see that the replacement numbers in the middle of the page that are, it's a widely divergent estimate. All we have at this point is anecdotal information that we've received back from the wastewater industry. The number could be 5,000, it could be 9,000, it could be something different, but as we begin to permit and regulate system replacement, we'll have a better handle on what exactly is going on with system replacements. One of the things that our first phase of modification of Article 6 did was to kind of restrict the way that we deal with pre-existing non-conforming flows. Walter and his staff kind of pulled apart the past practice of the department and the applicable regulations, didn't really like what they saw, and so we were able to include some modifications to what we call the grandfathering provisions in the update to Article 6 that was approved by the legislature. Walter felt very strongly about that, and it was supported by the Long Island Builders Institute, which we were pleasantly surprised. So here we are in terms of the septic industry licensing and training aspect of our program, standing up this industry. We can tell based on what the type of responses we're getting to the training sessions that we offer, whether or not the interest is there and whether we're building the industry, and the answer is that we are on a variety of levels, and you'll hear more about that when we talk about our septic incentive program. But a lot of people have been coming in for the training because there's a recognition that there's going to be great economic opportunity here as we move forward with a broader program to install these systems. So I want Walt to talk a little bit about the Environmental Health Information Management System, a very complex undertaking for us. We have a significant effort underway with a new contractor, and it's going to enable us to do things that will really pull Suffolk County, I think, into the 21st century very quickly. Walt, can you talk about EHIMS?
Thanks, Peter. We've been stuck in the 20th century for quite some time. If anybody still has trouble hearing us, let me know. I understand that there are some sound issues. I turned my microphone up and I'm talking a little closer. Peter, if you could do the same, and if there's still any trouble, let us know. Hopefully everybody can hear. So we have 5 major operating units, all of which are involved in permitting and management of wastewater in some way, shape, or form. We actually have 20 different databases that have been constructed for different purposes and times. They don't always talk to each other very well, let alone the public and outside stakeholders who want to come in through a portal and get the information. We're integrating all of these on one platform in a $2 million one-year program. This is going to facilitate not only public access but also industry access. So we envision that the industry will have electronic devices out in the field where they can automatically upload information. They can certify that the innovative on-sites have been inspected and are operating. Really, the only thing the homeowner has to worry about is to pay the annual maintenance contract after the 3-year warranty is up, have somebody come take a look, make sure the filters are clean, that the pumps are running, that it doesn't need a pump out. That populates our database. If there's any enforcement or follow-up issues, the computer system will generate an automatic form. It's going to help us track and manage this much better, which is something which was historically not the case. So this database will be up and running by early next year, which will be a huge help to our program. It's also a segue to our septic demonstration program. Now, when I first came on board in 1988, it was an era of an advanced wastewater system in Suffolk County called the Modified Subsurface Sewage Disposal System. We also called it the DNITE, and it was a nearly perfect passive system. It's basically a horizontal sand filter for nitrification, followed by a sulfur and limestone chamber for denitrification. The first one worked beautifully. People stopped watching the construction, installation, operation, and maintenance, and when everybody went back about 10 years later, they found that 500 of these uniformly failed. None of the ones we looked at worked for various reasons. Some of them failed in the distribution system, clogging. Some of them had improper sand materials. Some of them had the collection pan punctured. Fluid was never reaching the leaching basin. Others had the sulfur and limestone turn into one large brick with no chemical exchange. The State Department of Environmental Conservation did something really remarkable. The only time I'm aware of where they actually rescinded County Health Department authority, and they actually forbid us from approving innovative alternatives until the county and the state got their act together and figured out where this was heading, and it kind of put a black eye on this program for over a decade. Fortunately, the other proximate states have installed tens of thousands of these, and clearly they are functioning and have come a long way. We're a little behind in Suffolk County, the curve, but we have the benefit of learning from other states, and we did take a 4-state septic tour. We had very gracious hosts in Maryland, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. They continue to be our mentors and our teachers, and we've tried to pick the best elements of all of the program in terms of how they apply to our environment to really jumpstart an accelerated program. So as Peter mentioned, between phase 1 and 2, we have 14 different technologies which are being tested. We're also testing a pressurized shallow drain field, our first effort at horizontal leaching in the shallow zone with enhanced wastewater treatment for nitrogen and other contaminants. So far, we have 3 experimental systems. We have 5 provisional systems approved, which is really the important thing. Out of the 14 systems that came to us to be demonstrated, we set up challenge performance criteria. They needed to come to steady state. We needed 6 months of performance data. We needed to be sure that their engineering report was acceptable, that the community was capable of installing, operating, and maintaining those. 5 of those, a HydroAction, 2 Norwecos, an Arenco, and a Fuji system, are already certified for provisional use, which means that as long as they continue to perform, there's no limit on the number that can go in the ground. If there's any problem, we can obviously suspend approval for installation. That hasn't happened yet, and we don't expect it to happen. The other 9 systems are still in the process of being vetting. So here are the 5 systems that were approved. These are all biological systems. There are systems out there that rely on more chemical and physical processes. These are fairly conventional mini sewage treatment plants, ammonia to nitrate in the presence of oxygen in a food source, then again nitrate to nitrogen gas in the presence of anaerobic denitrifying bacteria. Some of these are recirculating systems, HydroAction, the Arenco and the Fuji all recirculate back to a septic tank or a septic chamber with an anoxic food source. Others, like the Norweco, are basically pass-through systems which are sequencing, adding oxygen to aerate, and then allowing the liquid to go through an anoxic phase to denitrify. All of these met our challenge standard of 19 milligrams per liter. The HydroAction was best at under 12. The others came in at roughly 17 to 19. Our numbers are really going up. We went from tens of systems to hundreds of systems with our septic incentive program that Peter will talk about. We also have jurisdictions that are jumping the gun and requiring these systems in townships like Brookhaven, Southampton, and East Hampton for new construction. We've got almost 150 of these approved, and with the New York State expansion to the Septic Improvement Program, we hope to very quickly be going into the range of 1,000 or more systems a year. Here are some of the other systems dealing with packed bed media, membrane bioreactors, trickling filters, as well as integrated fixed film activated sludge. I know that we're running behind, so I can't spend too much time on this, but I'd be happy to answer questions. Of the 9 systems that are outstanding, we think that 4 of them will be approved by the summer. The other 6, hopefully this year. The other 5, hopefully this year. Can't really project when. This chart shows that we've been called upon to take great scrutiny on the numbers. The legislature required us to do an annual report on these. We're looking not only at our performance in relation to the NSF certification, but also the 4 other proximate Mid-Atlantic and Northeast jurisdictions to make sure that we have a good handle on how these systems are performing and that we continue to improve performance moving forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Peter to discuss the Septic Improvement Program.
Thanks, Walt. I'll try and move quickly. So, the county executive is kind of a grand visionary here, and in addition to pointing out the importance of standing up the industry, he has always said this will never work unless we can make it affordable for homeowners to make the change. And he, about a year ago, pushed us to create a combination grant and loan program to incentivize the installation of these IA technologies by homeowners. I'll just zip through these. You don't need to see him signing the law, but we signed the law in the end of May. Real quick on the grant and loan program, we had the Suffolk County, the voters of Suffolk County in 2014 approved a referendum that included a modification of the county charter that provided us with $2 million a year through 2021 for the installation of nitrogen-reducing systems, providing a source of funding for a grant program, which gives us $2 million a year, and our program allows for grants of up to $10,000 plus $1,000 if you're interested in installing a pressurized shallow drain field, coupled with a low-interest loan that will allow homeowners to finance the remaining homeowners' share of their installation using non-governmental resources. We went out to funding organizations, philanthropic organizations, and were able to generate enough money to create a loan pool and to obtain a $1 million zero-interest line of credit from a local bank. We have an outside group, a not-for-profit called the Community Development Corporation of Long Island, administering a loan pool to allow folks who participate in our grant program to obtain financing to stretch out the cost of the homeowner share over 15 years at 3%. Basic numbers. So the county executive was adamant that our first effort to try and administer a program should be narrowly drawn so that it would not be overwhelming. So we put in place criteria to make it easier for us to manage. It has to be a single-family home. Obviously, it has to be served by a cesspool or septic and not a sewer district. Can't be a rental, can't be new construction, can't be a business in the home. Political officials are not eligible. And obviously, you have to have a valid certificate of occupancy. We have a very sophisticated application process. It's an electronic process designed by our own Department of Information Technology that allows people to apply electronically, upload all the necessary documents, create an electronic signature to certify what they're submitting and get going. The program places priority in the scoring, provides additional points for sites that are in close proximity to groundwater travel times are low, or within 1,000 feet of closed water bodies. A second category is parcels located within critical areas within 2 to 25-year groundwater travel time, and then everybody's eligible, but they just don't score as high. It's part of our effort to put these systems where they're going to have the most benefit. So we have a ranking and scoring process that I don't think I have time to run through, but we have a very well-established point system that can withstand scrutiny and is easy to understand. The program has been going very well. So here's some of the cost information we have been providing to homeowners as we explained the program and we were initially rolling it out. Our goal had been to keep the cost of the system installation at below $20,000. You see two options here. In some cases, folks can use their existing leaching structures with the new system. You simply install the treatment works in advance of your leaching system and leave the existing leaching rings in place. That's a more cost-effective solution, obviously, but in situations where you need to install leaching, we think you can still get a system in the ground for less than $20,000. We found pretty quickly that if we left market forces to dictate costs to homeowners, we would have a problem. We had a board member from one of the funding agencies go out and get a quote for a system, and he got a quote of $32,000, far greater than what we had told him he could expect to pay. We learned quickly from the people we've been working with in the state of Maryland who have the Bay Restoration Program that there's a way to control that. We followed Maryland's example. We went out to the manufacturers and asked them to quote fixed pricing for the installation of these systems, told them what our goal would be of keeping the pricing under $20,000, and we offered that opportunity to any manufacturer or their local rep. You could either participate or not. This is the pricing system, the pricing vendor cost ranking sheet you'll see on our website if you go to participate. You can see that people who met the goal of keeping a system cost under $20,000 are above the red line. Those who were not able to do that are not. And another aspect of our program that is unique to New York is that the plans for these systems need to be stamped by an engineer or an architect, which is an additional cost that we're dealing with. It adds about $2,500 to the cost of the system. We've been pushing the state for some way to provide relief on that requirement. Also, a screen from our website shows the contacts for each of the technologies that are participating. You see we have electrical costs indicated on the top right-hand side of the screen. They vary on the system depending upon the technology. And there's a maintenance cost for these systems as well. Staff says it's around $300, although under Article 19 of our sanitary code, manufacturers are responsible for supplying the first 3 years of maintenance, so that's not an immediate cost to homeowners. As I indicated, the need for a design professional for a stamped plan adds cost to the systems. We went out to the industry and asked for competitive pricing, and our initial responses from engineers were as much as $7,000 to do one of these plans for these systems. We found that to be unacceptable and went back at them a little bit. And you can see we got competitive pricing out of a bunch of them. These people are out there doing the work right now. Some of the costs we talked a little bit about. I saw there was a question. Operations and maintenance, ballparked at $300 a year. Electrical costs could range from $57 to $266 depending on the system. Here's how a theoretical participant could benefit from the program. Assuming that an installation was going to cost $17,850, the homeowner receives a grant of $10,000, leaving a remaining homeowner share of $7,850. If they take advantage of the low-interest financing aspect of our program and borrow that amount at 3% over 15 years, they'd end up paying $648 a year or $54 a month. And as the county executive is quick to point out, if a homeowner is facing the need to replace an existing system and may need to reach into their pocket for $6,000 cash outlay at one time, this might be a desirable option for a homeowner. And we were interested in seeing what kind of response we would get once we rolled the program out. We really couldn't say. We went out and did some town hall meetings to explain it before it was enacted, but we didn't know what kind of volume we were going to see. Here's our homepage for our program. I encourage people to visit it. If you're interested in playing around with the application process, we'll give you a generic identity to use so you won't get in trouble. But it's interesting. If you put in your address, it will self-populate your tax map, lot number, and pop up a photo of your home. It's pretty exciting. We're pretty proud of this product by the county's own workforce. I've been telling external stakeholders that if I had to use a consultant to do it, it would have taken me a year and a half and $1 million probably. Oh, good stuff. It pops up a photo of the location. So we have been paying the grant directly to the vendor installer. There's sign-off by the grant recipient homeowner, but we like to make the dispersal directly to the design professional who does the design and the vendor who does the installation only after we've confirmed that the installation has been successfully completed. We are aware that in some cases homeowners require permits from other entities. In this instance, we recognize that in some cases folks need permits from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and so we approached DEC and asked us if they would work with us to kind of standardize that process to make it easier for applicants, and they created a standard activity permit for us for alternative septic system installations in Suffolk County. We couldn't be more thankful for that. And so as of March 14th, we began accepting applications on July 3rd, 2017. We have enough funding for 200 grants of $10,000 in the first year. 1,023 people have registered on our website. That means they've taken an initial step. 280 have completed applications, and we've already issued 207 grant certificates. So the public interest in this program is there. Recognize this is a voluntary situation. And we've been waiting for the weather to get warmer. We have a whole bunch of installations in the pipeline that are about to rock and roll if the winter would just go away. This is a breakdown on town by town. Brookhaven is the largest town in our county, but you can see that even though the level of public awareness of these issues is greater in the more rural areas of the eastern end of our county, we have very, very widespread participation here. We also are supportive of New York State's efforts to create state resources to supplement efforts of counties like ours to press for the installation of these systems. And we were recently made aware that we will be receiving, we in Suffolk County, a single county, will be receiving $10 million of the $15 million that is being dispersed statewide, which gives us a lion's share of the money, and also gives us challenges in terms of how to get the money out the door given the staff that we have. We're trying to deal with that now. Just comparison of the programs. I'm going to rock through this because we want to get done in a few minutes. Yeah, we are wrestling with these issues right now. I'm not going to spend time on it. I'll give Walt a couple minutes to talk about the kelp aquaculture feasibility study. Walt?
Yep, just very quickly, this is a parallel county effort to hope to promote an industry while reduce nitrogen pollution. This is a pilot study on aquaculturing for sugar kelp. It's an emerging green industry with environmental and economic benefits. This study was to evaluate the potential to improve water quality while producing a high demand and renewable product. that showed preliminary results that were very promising at a couple of different sites. And this, as well as other programs, which might include oysters and other bioextraction, might wind up being quite promising. This is a map in the Peconics. In Flanders and in Long Beach, there was some very promising growth in the initial pilot phase of this study, which is continuing. Wanted to spend just a moment on harmful algal blooms. Now, the endpoints for our sub-watershed plan deal with, obviously, dissolved oxygen, which is the most common historic metric for nitrogen impacts on surface waters. It's the easiest to measure and the most obvious and the best developed. We're also looking at water clarity, eelgrass conditions, chlorophyll A, and harmful algal blooms. As Peter mentioned, we have a growing harmful algal bloom problem in Suffolk County. Dr. Gobler, who is one of the foremost national experts, happens to live in our backyard. He produced this slide, which showed that for 30 years we had the largest hard clam and scallop fishery on the East Coast without any HABs. First we had Oreococcus at brown tide, then the blue-green algae, cyanobacteria reared its head, then a couple of red tides, PSP, DSP, and C. poly, a rust tide came. So we have at least 5 and counting. There's a couple of others that show up seasonally as well. It's a growing issue, and there was an acknowledged need to have a coordinated strategy for this. We held a symposium in 2016, put out a report in 2017, which concluded that we may have reached a level unprecedented in terms of frequency and diversity in the country. Climate variability is certainly a factor, and it may accelerate this, but reductions in scope and extent is possible, particularly with nutrient reductions. There's a whole host of recommendations. The plan is on our Reclaim Our Water webpage. We'll be doing an annual symposium. Next one is going to be coming in May. Look out for the notice. Dealing with management and nutrient reductions, monitoring. We're going to start looking for diuretic shellfish poisoning toxin. We hope to establish a website where people can provide real-time information and get near real-time information about where these HABs are, and a number of different research priorities, which has been relatively underfunded in recent years. We have hit our deadline, and Peter has the final thought of the presentation.
I don't know about the final thought, just that the the leadership of the county executive has made a huge difference here. During the years I was at DEC and working with the NGOs, we were just waiting for an elected official who was willing to kind of take the mantle. And all the work that we've been briefing you on is really as a result of this county executive guiding and supporting what we're doing. So thanks. We're happy to try to answer questions.
All right. Thank you, Walt and Peter, for that very informative presentation. What you all have accomplished in Suffolk County can definitely serve as a great resource for the localities across the country. So we've got a few questions in the chat box, and I'll read those off, and either of you can answer. The first question is from Abe. He says, what does it cost to the homeowner to maintain this innovative and alternative system? What happens when power is lost? Does the system revert back to working like a conventional septic system?
I'll take a crack at that, and Walt can back me up if I fall short. So we provided some information about annual maintenance costs, which staff pegs at around $300 a year. And the question about how the systems work in the case of a power outage varies by technology. Some of them will just revert to flow-through and it will function as a conventional septic system. Others of them will not. And we have spoken with folks about approaches people can take to deal with the potential for power outages in terms of having emergency generator capacity or some alternative to that. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Walt?
No, basically these systems are designed with freeboard, so there's a couple of additional days of retention capacity where they can be used in the event of a hurricane or a power outage, as you mentioned, Peter. If they don't flow by gravity, we want the design to have basically an emergency generator plug so that in the neighborhood, a lot of these are low-lying areas that require pumps to elevate the flow to go to a system in those areas. A generator could go house to house and pump these out to free up freeboard capacity in the event of an outage.
All right. Thanks, guys. The next question comes from Christina Heineman. She wants to know if either of you will comment on the people aspect of the county's efforts. People and local dynamics can add challenges that are not solved by technology alone. coupled with this management of large numbers of advanced systems, can also present significant challenges. Are there any lessons learned along these lines that either of you can offer?
Let's take them one at a time. So first, yeah, I would say that people aspects of what we're doing are significant in a couple of ways. We're getting tremendous support and interest on the part of people who care about these issues, but we also have to deal with the political and economic realities associated with the evolution away from the use of cesspools and septics to IA systems. And we're mindful of the fact that we need to give policymakers a level of comfort that these changes are really necessary, and that to the extent that there's going to be any concern on the part of their constituents, that it's a learning curve. So we try to be mindful of that, and we try not to overreact to any implied criticism for the program, and to take benefit of support that we're getting, across the board from environmental and the business community. Walter, is there anything you wanted to add on the people aspect?
No, my concern is mainly operational. Basically, that the reason that the old D-Nights failed is that we did not have a well-developed program of industry training or certification. We didn't have any program of monitoring or oversight or reporting. All of those are being dealt with in terms of IT technology upgrades, as well as internal capacity. Once these systems go to general use approval, we're going to make sure that the manufacturer gets these samples, that the O&M person samples them at least once every 3 years. We're going to have a subset of 10 to 20 of each technology that we sample as a health department. The worst thing that can happen, in my view, to a program is backsliding and not paying attention to it. Diminished performance will give people an excuse to not embrace and promote this as something that deserves to happen and needs to happen.
Right, and so the only thing I'd add to that, the management of large numbers of systems. As you can imagine, we have 145 systems, I guess, in the ground, but our goal is to get thousands and thousands of them in the ground, and we need to make sure they're maintained, as Walt indicates, otherwise the benefit of the systems isn't realized. So it's great that we have a sanitary code provision that requires homeowners to have a maintenance contract, but then that burdens government with the need to police that. And so moving forward, we have talked about potential policy options to deal with that. I mean, once you have thousands of these systems in the ground, if you're successful in creating a countywide water quality protection district, you could theoretically have the district let contracts for these maintenance services and achieve economic benefit through economies of scale, and actually have the maintenance handled through a district if you moved ahead and created a district. So we don't have any lessons learned yet because we don't have a large number of those systems yet in the ground, but we recognize it's going to be a significant challenge moving forward, and it's something we've been discussing.
Okay, the next question is for Mary Music. She asks, can you comment on how you're dealing with the underground injection control program, or also known as a Class 5 program, when you're considering large capacity or cluster systems?
Walt, can you take that one?
Yep. So the EPA underground injection program has been coordinated with the local health department for many years now. Basically, everything that we do complies with the underground injection control insofar as that whenever a facility with a large capacity cesspool comes in the door with any change in use or flow or application, we make sure that they comply with the pretreatment requirements of a septic tank and anything else that's required under the UIC. We've also been coordinating in terms of records review. EPA has been trying to identify high priority areas that may have legacy cesspools that don't comply. We've been freely sharing our information. We've been trying to educate the community in terms of mechanisms like restaurant permits, that you need to have adequate wastewater to implement UIC. So I didn't spend much time on this, but these innovative alternatives are applicable to commercial systems. Here in Suffolk County, once you hit 30,000 gallons per day, you're subject to full-scale, speedy sewage treatment plant and 10 state standards requirements. DEC stuff kicks in. It's no longer an IA that meets 19 milligrams per liter. It's a full-scale sewage treatment plant. Anything under 30,000, our standards also allow these IAs for commercial facilities. So if you have anything in the 1,000 to 30,000 gallon range, we're highly encouraging the use of these innovative alternatives. There have been several of these that have been piloted already and several more on the boards. The first one was at a county park. It was an Arenco system, a flow of about 4,000 gallons per day. That system came to equilibrium in under a month and bet 19 for its first summer. Several other county parks around Lake Ronkonkoma and Huntington are putting these in as a model, and we expect more and more commercials with large capacity cesspools to utilize this technology as well.
Okay, now we have a couple questions from the State of Hawaii Department of Health. One of them is very easy. They want to know how many staff are under your program, and then the second one that they just asked is, have you approved of any true passive systems that do not require electricity to operate?
I'll take the second one first. The only truly passive system was the failed D-Night. That was a system, it turns out the first permutation of it was totally passive, and it turned out that without pressure dosing, the manifold orifices were clogging, so that ultimately wound up not even being a totally passive system. It wound up being pressure dosed. Even after that, these things wound up failing. Every one of the systems that we now have uses at least one pump and or one aerator. They're simple systems. They're relatively easy to operate and maintain, interchangeable parts, but none of the ones that we have in this program right now are truly passive. First question in terms of staff, that's a complicated question because the staff that we have working on this innovative alternative program also work on our regular wastewater programs. We receive something like 3,000 applications a year. We have a couple of people in the Innovative Alternative Development Program. Justin Jobin, an expert from Rhode Island, many of you may know by now. John Sanjan heads up that unit. We've got a couple of sanitarians and an engineer in wastewater. That number is growing as time goes on, so it's not an insignificant number of resources. If you'd like, I can get more information about unit time needed per review and approval of application.
Okay, and again, any information that, the Hawaii, if you want more information, just send me an email and I can forward that on to Walt. The next question is from Piper with Arkansas. She wants to know, she wants to hear more about the information management system. Who would be a good contact?
That would be Walt. Walt's the best contact for the EM system.
Okay. Another question from Dan. He wants to know, can we get a copy of his PowerPoint?
Of course.
Okay, so I'll send that out along with the recording link once this is uploaded. We have a question from Hallie Thurston. She wants to know, do all homeowners get the same amount of money?
I think that the answer to the question is thus far yes. What we're trying to help them do is cover the full cost of the system, and since the grant of $10,000 won't cover the full cost, they're entitled to the full grant. On the loan side, they're entitled to, up to $10,000 to cover the cost of a system. I think on the grant side, everybody's getting the same amount.
Okay. Next question is from Christy. She wants to know, how are you able to track real estate transactions or property use changes if an applicant has already been given grant assistance approval?
We have a very sophisticated interactive database and application process where once the property's in the system, you're not going to be able to double back and get a dual benefit, even if that were a goal, since once the system's installed, you really don't need another one. There are a lot of safeguards inherent in the system. Even goes so far that if you answer a question incorrectly relative to eligibility criteria, it will, it terminates the process for you. We have some safeguards built in, and if there are more detailed questions about that, I'm happy to have anybody who's interested in it communicating directly with our health department staff or IT staff as to how we make that happen.
Okay, we have 3 more questions, and we're about out of time, but we can go through those. We might just go a few minutes over. So the next question is again from Hallie. She wants to know, did you consider any schemes that pay different amounts, like using a reverse auction wherein you rank grant applicants based on higher effectiveness scores and lowered the bid requests?
Yeah, we did actually. I know Maryland has got an approach whereby they look at cost per pound of nitrogen or cost effectiveness, and they sort of average out the top three, I think, in terms of what they pay out. Based on the pool of technologies that we had, we didn't see one that was that much different than the rest. And the price points were coming in fairly similarly. We decided to keep this round simple and just have one lump sum per technology. We do reevaluate this every year. Based on system performance, folks have called for an incentive-based program. Is something that we may do in the future, but it's a good point. We haven't done it yet, though.
Okay. Next question is from Sherry. Could you give me more information on the HAB conference, Harmful Algal Bloom Conference? When, where will it be recorded and available?
Yep, it'll be in Suffolk County probably in late May. They're converging on a final date. It's not been published yet. I can get that information to Zach as soon as it becomes available. I can also give you a contact person in our shop that's helping to coordinate that.
All right, and the final question from Sean Merrigan. Are the passive systems using sand or sawdust below the footprint being piloted at any of the properties in Suffolk County?
The answer is yes. Walt, do you want to talk a little bit about the work we're doing on Suffolk County Parks properties and why these systems can't be termed truly passive?
Yep. So basically, the Stony Brook Center for Clean Water Technology is championing this. Is one of their potentially relatively low-cost, simple, and high-effectiveness solutions. All of the design permutations that we have now involve some form of pumping and recycling. So they're relatively simple and not that complicated, but they're not truly passive. They're being piloted. The designs are in place, and they're being installed. I think the ribbon cutting for one of them is coming up within the next week or so, Peter. As we speak, we'll have a subset of these as an experimental technology to look at cost effectiveness on and hope to have results within the coming year.
All right, great. Well, we're out of time here. Perfect timing. It's 2:31. So I'd like to thank you all again for taking the time today to participate in this webinar. And I'd again like to especially thank our presenters, Walter and Peter, for taking the time out of their busy schedules to deliver this important webinar. As a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on the EPA webpage for all of you to share with those who might not have been able to attend it today and if they're interested in the program. So with that, I will go ahead and conclude. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.